Hey all, this is Stefan at KMR Audio. Today we have EveAnna Manley, right here from Manley Labs, here to talk about stories of manufacturing and their equipment and all this classy valve gear that she makes. Can you tell us about how Manley gear is made?
I've been doing this for 30 years. This is my 30th year building tube gear in Southern California. I've got about 25 people in our factory in California. And we do sub out some processes such as surface mount, board stuffing, but all the wiring, all the metalwork is done in Chino. We do all the finishing in the factory. We have a machine shop. We drive the parts over to an anodizer to get them dyed and anodized. And they come back. We do the engraving and all the assembly. We do the final quality control and packaging and all the commercial management and all that. That's all done in Chino, not China, as we say. There are two excellent factory tour videos that got made this year. One of them was done by Michael Fremer, who's the vinyl guy from Stereophile, and also Warren Huart, Produced Like a Pro. He came and did a walkthrough at the factory too. Both those videos are about an hour long, but I take you through every detail, every little tiny bit, and I don't hide anything. There's nothing secret, and you really can learn a lot about how one can put this gear together in Southern California.
Which piece of Manley equipment are you most proud of, and why?
Oh, look here. It's the Vox Box. All right, I'll tell you why the Vox Box is my most proud achievement. When David Manley left the company in 1996, I was put into the hot seat, and I wanted to kick ass with a new design. So I wanted to do a vocal channel, so a multifaceted unit like this, mic pre, compressor, EQ, and a de-esser and limiter. What I did was I took existing bits that we were already building, like the 40 dB mic pre, the LOP limiter, turned that into a compressor. We took the mid-frequency Pultec and extended out the frequencies, and then took the LOP again and added a de-esser to it. So like I enhanced every single unit over what the standalone unit was, and it was a kind of big like, ha-ha, this is better than all the other stuff, the older stuff, you know. And I was really proud of that, and it's become a super successful piece. It got a Tech Hall of Fame award, that was a big honor. And then what was great that we did 5 years ago was come out with a derivative of the Vox Box, and we embraced all these things that we had learned in the last 20 years about making things more manufacturable. So like the wire looming for the Vox Box, there might be, I'll just make up a number, maybe 25 wires that, you know, someone has to cut and strip and tin and prep and all this stuff. And in the core, it's like 6, and they snap together really quickly. You know, maybe this takes 5 or 6 hours to put together. The core takes 1 hour to put together. And that's the kind of thinking that went into the core and why we could bring it out at half the price. And they sound so close. They do. The differences between them is pretty small. It's definitely not 2 to 1. You know what I mean? So I'm really proud of both of these units. They represent, you know, a really great achievement of the time in the 90s, and then bringing the price down so everybody can afford it.
So why a channel? Was there already a channel on the market at the time?
Well, these days, if you have a console. The concept is, especially where at the time there were not a lot of channel strips. I think one of the inspirations for me was there was a Focusrite thing called the Voice Box. And I was like, wow, why didn't they call that the Vox Box? Because it rhymes. And anyway, I grabbed that name off, not from them, but I was inspired by them. So yeah, that vocal channel thing was kind of a new concept at the time. There weren't a lot of channel strips. The 737 would be a good example of a successful channel strip that also began in the mid-90s.
AMEC had that thing, right?
Right.
The 1998
yes.
channel.
But now look at how so many people are recording today, they don't have a recording console, right? And they're just tracking and tracking and tracking. So what do you need to track? You need a mic pre. Well, you need a microphone. You need mic pre. You need some kind of dynamics control and some kind of sweetening. And that's what we're doing here. And that's called a console strip or a channel strip or a reference channel strip or a vocal channel. But the real secret with the Vox Box, the bass players all say, you should have called it the bass box, because this is one hell of an awesome bass preamplifier.
What's your favorite studio story?
Can I tell you a great piano tuner story? Okay, I was selling a piano, and it was a really old piano, and we had put all new bass strings on it. It was used in our recording studio in the early 90s in Chino. And it was a big Bluthner, a 9'4" Bluthner. It was this gorgeous piano. It sounded amazing. And over the years, I got to know the piano technician, Jim Christopher, who would come down and tune the piano and prep it, and he rebuilt a whole bunch of stuff. And anyway, it came time to sell this piano. And Jim had moved away. And so he said, just call a tuner, because I had a client flying in from New York to check it out, to buy it. And I called this piano tuner. He's like, all right, I'll come tune it. And he came, it was at the factory at the time, this piano. And Jim had told me, make sure that he doesn't just crank on the bass strings, because the pegs are kind of loose in the wood, and just tell him to pay attention and don't break any strings, because, there's two strings for every bass note, and they're all matched. And, if you think recording guys are anal, try like me and this piano, right? So I told this piano tuner this, and he kind of like patted me on my little girl head, like, I know what I'm doing, and I just went downstairs and tried to keep it together. Well, sure as eggs, this guy comes downstairs and says, oh, I broke the D string, just one of them though. And I'm like, get out of here. I'm just so pissed off, because all these strings had all aged together, and now that one string is just going to always be a little different, I was so pissed off. So as it turned out, the client came, he loved the piano, and he bought it, and it went to Chungking Studios in New York. So that part of the story turned out okay. Okay, so the piano tuner, he calls me up a few weeks later. He says, oh, I left my tuning fork, I think, in the bench or something. And I'm like, oh, let me go find it. And I went up and opened the piano bench, and there it was. And so I'm like, yeah, I got it. And so I took it downstairs to the machine shop and fired up the belt sander. And you went, ding, and then went, ding, just a hair. I was so mad at this guy. That's like the worst revenge I've ever taken on anybody. But don't leave your tuning forks with me.
So you've brought that passion to all of your electronics as well?
Well, yeah, everything's got to be matched up, like tubes have to be matched, and in the massive passive, all the chokes have to be matched and the caps have to be matched. So we do our best to give you computer-like accuracy with analog parts, and it's really hard, because some of these pots and caps and things, it's 5%, 10%, 20% tolerance range. So that's why we have to measure every one before they're installed and make pairs, and then build those together so your lefts and rights are always the same, that kind of thing.
How many ways do you test each valve when considering a batch that are going to work together in a particular unit?
It depends which unit. So like the variable mu, that's a differential circuit. So in that case, the tubes, in one glass bottle, you'll have two triodes contained inside the same tube. So you can't really change anything about the two guys that are living inside. All you can do is measure and select for good triode to triode matching. And if we keep the triode to triode matching in the variable mu really good, all the push and all the pull, if that's all matched up really well, then you can go fastest on the attack without getting a percussive strike. You know, you've heard that kind of thuck, thuck sound, you know, if you have a really quick piano transient or a snare. If we keep the matching really good, then you can run the fastest attack times without getting any kind of, noise. That's important. Now, tubes that don't pass those tests, they can be used in another kind of circuit, like maybe a series circuit instead of a parallel circuit, or an output stage circuit where there's not a lot of gain. The microphones, these guys need the very quietest tubes in the building, you know, so the first test is a noise test, and if it's a really quiet tube, they get pulled for the microphones. So we try to maximize the usage of all our tubes that we use. We don't have the luxury to buy 100 tubes and only use 20. So we have to try to find homes for all of them. But through specialized testing and very, knowledgeable testing, we can maximize our usage.
But yet it's still another stage in the manufacturing, which is time and labor intensive.
Absolutely. But that's what you're paying for when you're buying Manley gear, is that so many of these parts were pre-tested and pre-matched, and we're trying to give you computer-like accuracy with analog gear, and that's very difficult.
Your latest outboard releases, your Core, the New Mu, Force, great names.
Thank you.
They're getting great feedback from our customers. Apart from cosmetic updates, are there any common design features in each of these pieces?
Right. As I touched on before, the manufacturability of these products, that's something we really focused on. So we made the chassis shorter so that the board inside could also contain all the in and out input and output connectors without all kinds of additional manual wiring. So the way it's put together, again, we've designed it so it really pops together. Each of those 4 units, the New Mu, the LOT Plus, the Force, and the Core, those puppies all pop together within an hour. That is significantly faster than all the older products that might have taken, 4 to 9 hours to put together. The Force in particular, you compare that to the Manley dual mono mic pre, which was in a 1U chassis, and all the tubes are lying down, and there's all this hand wiring in there. That took 8 or 9 hours for somebody to wire up, for a human, an American, to put together. So, 9 hours for 2 channels, and now we have 1 hour for 4 channels. That's where it's at right there. Now, common to those 4 units is also our new Manley power supply. And that was designed for us by Bruno Putzis, who is the worldwide expert on that type of technology. As far as I'm concerned, he is the world expert. He's an amazing guy. And I got to know him at the trade shows just because we had common distributors with his other companies. And I asked him one day, I'm like, hey, Bruno, do you think you can make one of these power supplies, for vacuum tubes? We need 300 volts. We need a lot of amps in the heaters, and we might need to drive some chips or some relays. So give us, plus or minus 15 and maybe a 5-volt rail or something. And he was like, yeah, I don't see why not. And so we got to work on it, and 2,000 and so power supplies later, they've proven to be a real great success, and they sound amazing. And there's 5 ways to Sunday why they're better than the older linear supplies, but least of which they sound better. Every time I do the shootouts, and we'll take an existing unit with its linear supply, and then mod 1 for the switching power supply, it just sounds better. So that's driving force number 1. Unfortunately, it's no less expensive to make. We didn't do it for cost reasons. However, it's very much more convenient for everybody. Number 1, we don't have to keep different stocks of 120 volt units versus 240 volt units for different distributors around the world. We can just keep one part because the power supply works everywhere around the world. And that's awesome for all the customers because you can get a gig overseas and fly and plug it in, and it will work, just like your Apple iPhone charger will work everywhere around the world. So I think that we're really ahead of the curve on this one with this power supply. It's a very, very important development, and it's something that Manley's got that none of our peers have. Everyone's still on the old technology, and they'll probably watch this video and say, hey, guys, we need... But anyway, we're ahead of the curve on this one. I'm really super proud of leading the edge on power supply design.
So Manley have collaborated on some great sounding software emulations with Universal Audio. Their massive passive sounds pretty good. What made you decide to support a software version, and do you think it impacts positively or negatively on hardware sales?
That's a great question, and it took me a long time to come around. In fact, I was a very long holdout to allow anybody to do a software emulation. I chose UA also because we had become good buddies at these trade shows, and we're really good friends, and I knew that they had the integrity and I could trust them with my brand. We worked together on the development of these emulations, and we would give them units, we'd give them the schematics, and they would capture the schematics, and mathematically in the computer, they've modeled the actual circuitry. It's more complicated than I know about, believe me. But anyway, then they would come with the raw code, and we would get the opportunity to go through it with them and measure it and compare the software emulation with the actual hardware. And sometimes the early development was like, wait a minute, I'm measuring even order harmonics here. You guys are odd. No, go back and you got to get this right. Sometimes certain things wouldn't be quite right, but we held them to a really high standard to be accurate to the unit. As it's turned out, it's been a great collaboration. And at first, a lot of people get afraid, oh, it's going to hurt my sales. Everyone's just going to buy the plug-in. They won't buy the hardware anymore. But actually what we found is it's gone to a wider base of people. The base of the pyramid is wider because they've got, hundreds of thousands of users. And the plug-in versions of the Massive Passive, Variable Mu, and the Vox Box, they kind of serve like the demo version of the hardware. And they sort of, set in the market like the entry-level piece. And then maybe the core is your mid-level piece, and the Vox Box is the expensive top guy. So it's really worked for us, and they're a great company to work with. I think it's also allowed the Manley brand to get in front of so many more people that never even knew about it, because maybe Manley stuff was only in these big studios that the kids never would get into, So overall, it's been a really great relationship. I'm very proud of that.
Manley stuff, mostly valve-based, always seems to impart a subtle musical glow whilst maintaining audiophile quality and detail. Are you ever tempted to push things in the direction of more harmonic saturation? Or is that really not what Manley are about?
Tried that once. Okay. I remember early development of the Massive Passive, and I took an early prototype in to a friend of mine, mastering engineer in LA, and I took it in there, and we listened to it together against his Masilek, which is very clean and precise, and especially in the bass, it's like, well, yeah, the Masilek, that's what bass sounds like, and this prototype sounds like mud. And it's like, no. I took it back to Chino, and I'm like, no. We're not this sounds like a $300 tube pre. It's terrible. We need to clean this up, because tube distortion is not naturally what tubes are all about. You have to kind of make it do that, so that's what the guys were kind of going for. And I'm like, no, we're not going that direction. We're running 300-volt rails. We've got huge high headroom. We've got these great transformers that we design and wind in-house. We can get all the fidelity all day long. So I'm really all about that. Music's supposed to be emotional. There's a lot of music that just flies by your ears, and you're just like, yawn, and you get something that just brings the emotion out, whether it's the lyric or the hook or just the whole production or just knowing the story behind the artist or whatever. We're supposed to be achieving an emotional connection to the song, to the artist, to the music, and I've got to make that come through my gear. That's my job.
Other manufacturers have explored 500 series modules. I don't see any Manley 500 series. Why?
I don't see any either. We're used to running like off of 300 volt rails. I'm not going to be able to give you the headroom or the fidelity with plus or minus 15. Just not going to be able to do it. And I have not wanted to compromise on this. Instead, that Manley Force, 4 channels, they retail for, I don't know in the UK, but say $2,500 in the States. It's like $550 a channel or $525 a channel. What could I do in a 500 series module with plus or minus 15 volts for the same number of dollars that I can do successfully with 300 volt with that awesome Manley power supply, the switcher, the really great one, and it just rocks. Those preamps kill. They're so awesome. I couldn't achieve anything near that in 500 series format. So it's a compromise, not doing it.
How do you like to spend your time away from the labs?
Yeah, I like to ride motorcycles. So I've got a lot of audio friends around the world that also ride motorcycles, and that's been one of my passions all my life, really. My grandfather taught me how to ride motorbike when I was like 11 or 12. As soon as I could reach the pegs, I was riding on a little 100cc bike up in New Hampshire with him, and I've always loved doing that. I'll be doing another Vietnam trip on little bikes. We're going to ride from Hanoi to Saigon at Christmas. So it'll be not the Ho Chi Minh Trail, it'll be the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So we'll be making that trip. And motorcycle and traveling. And fortunately, I get to travel a lot with my work because we sell this gear all over the world, so I can come around and visit wherever Manley gear is sold. And I love traveling. I love meeting new people. I love, learning about different cultures and so on. So music, motorcycles, and audio. Those are my main passions right there.